The shock waves from the global financial crisis of 2008 continue to be felt around the world, and the banking profession has rarely been held in such low regard. But there are some financial institutions that are benefiting from all that fallout from the crisis. Later in the hour, we're going to hear from Peter Blom, the chair of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values and the chief executive of Europe's Triodos Bank, which bills itself as the world's most sustainable bank. First, we'll hear about Bank Transfer Day, a movement in the United States which has seen an estimated 6 million people switching their accounts out of the big commercial banks and into community-owned ones. Earlier this week, I spoke to the young woman behind the Bank Transfer Day, Kristen, who's an art gallery owner in Los Angeles, who came up with the idea. I asked her how it all came about.
When Bank of America announced the fee policy that they would be instituting, that only applied to consumers with less than $20,000 in combined accounts, I simply just could not support a company that I felt was intentionally targeting the impoverished and working classes. And so I researched my alternatives, literally typed into Google alternative banking, and came up with a Wikipedia page that outlined how credit unions operate. And based on that, I knew I couldn't keep this secret to myself and created a Facebook event page that I sent to 500 of my 800 Facebook friends, expecting that about 200 would RSVP and 100 would move their money. But to date, we've seen American Banker recently reported that 6 million Americans have changed the way they bank in the past nearly year since Bank Transfer Day was started.
So you touched a really raw nerve here.
I would definitely say so. I think for a number of decades now, consumers had become complacent in tolerating, the policies of a company and supporting companies that they didn't agree with. And I think a lot of consumers were really just fed up. They were tired of these policies, but yet many of them, didn't look at the core of capitalism, that companies can, enact these regulations within the law, of course, and how they're going to operate. But we have a duty as consumers to only support companies whose values echo our own. If we're supporting companies we don't agree with, we're not pulling our weight. And so I think with that in mind, a lot of consumers took action to support credit unions or community banks and other organizations that they feel support their communities.
Yes, I was going to ask you, is it just credit unions, or are there other community banks, as you say, or other institutions, lending institutions or savings institutions that were logical alternatives to the corporate banks?
Well, I think a truly community-owned bank is a better alternative to a corporate banking institution. There are many community banks out there that really do invest in their communities, but the problem therein lies with the for-profit structure, that a corporate bank can purchase a smaller bank without notifying consumers. And so, you're right back where you started. And with the democratic structure of financial cooperatives, it just makes them such a valuable tool for members of the community to invest in what makes a community great, which is, your family, your friends, your neighbors, and the appreciation of hard work.
What were the most objectionable aspects of those major banks' policies? Was it their fees, or was it is it their wider behaviour in the context of the financial crisis and all of that they helped precipitate?
I could say, on a personal level, I think many CEOs of banks have taken what I would call some very arrogant moves and arrogant decisions that I wouldn't personally agree with. On a strictly consumer level, the way the mortgage foreclosures were handled, I didn't personally appreciate that. I thought that could have been done a lot better. But, the fee itself, while a lot of people were upset with the fee, I think those people who were upset with the fee, for the most part, were individuals who couldn't necessarily afford it, or they were upset by the principle behind it of knowing people who couldn't afford this fee, that $60 a year may not seem like much to a lot of us, but I used to work for a not-for-profit that coordinated services for the developmentally disabled, and these individuals receive a disability payment stipend from the government. So they're living literally hand to mouth on $600 to $1,000 a month. When you're working with that kind of budget, you can't afford to lose a single penny, let alone, $5 every single month for the quote convenience of using your debit card.
You've said publicly that the Bank of America, for instance, re-established this $5 monthly fee for debit card access just before the bank transfer day took place, and that they have reintroduced it.
Well, they did put that back in place, and they have instituted other fees that are very similar. All of the banks have at this point. That just a couple of days before the deadline goal for Bank Transfer Day 2011, which was November 5th, I believe it was November 2nd or 3rd, that Bank of America announced they changed their mind on the fee, and they weren't going to institute it any longer. And I recognized it then very immediately as being a publicity stunt, that they were hoping to, shine themselves in a good light. And, we've heard you, and we've changed our minds. But really, I knew they would reinstitute it, and that it's just words. And above all else, I think actions speak louder than words. That, you really have to, for lack of corniness, I guess, you have to put your money where your mouth is. And if you want to invest in your community, there are ways to do it that are very clear, very simple, and targeting the least fortunate in our communities, that's definitely not the way to invest in those communities.
Has that decision by the Bank of America been widely known? I mean, you've been shouting it from the rooftops.
I think many people do definitely know it. I've seen a couple of posts from supporters of Bank Transfer Day here in America who have taken note whenever banks are instituting new fees or new policies that are, in direct contradiction with the statements they made just before Bank Transfer Day last year. One of those that's been most troubling for consumers has been the idea of zombie accounts, that many of these people tried to close their accounts in good faith. They attempted to move all ongoing transactions when you have a monthly charge that comes across. They did attempt to move all of those. And if they missed one, instead of just simply declining the charge, the bank would reopen their account and put the charge through and then charge them an overdraft fee. And so that, being a fan of zombie movies, I thought the title was very appropriate to call them zombie accounts. And it's just been very recently that the American federal government has stepped in and said, that's not right. You can't do that. And so many banks are now, doing away with those policies and changing them. I think it's going to be an ongoing process, though. As people, we evolve every single day, and our opinions are ideals. And so the societies that are comprised of individuals will naturally evolve every single day.
How much? I mean, it's a year or so since that initiative was launched. I mean, what's happened to the growth of or the shift away from banks and into credit unions since then?
It's been absolutely phenomenal, and definitely much more than I ever dared to dream. As I mentioned, American Banker had recently reported that 6 million American consumers have changed the way they bank. That doesn't necessarily mean that all 6 million move their money into credit unions. There are still some communities that aren't fortunate enough to have a financial cooperative supporting them. That was just absolutely incredible to see that kind of shift. And even beyond that, to see how it's shaping our society, the idea that, one person with a computer can reach that many consumers. It's amazing to me now that political science professors are now teaching the next generation of politicians and campaign managers that you don't need billions of dollars to run a successful campaign. You can do so by this very valuable tool that is social media.
Yes, and it's quite clearly going to gain in strength as time goes by. I mean, has to your knowledge, a similar initiative been launched elsewhere in the world? I mean, have other countries
Oh,
picked this up?
all over the place. It's
Yeah.
amazing. I've heard personally from individuals in the United Kingdom and Australia, and then now most recently was Denmark. And I'm absolutely thrilled. I'll be traveling to Copenhagen to meet with the young men and women behind the movement called Skift Bank Dag, which does just translate to Bank Transfer Day. And the things they're doing there with a social media tool is just absolutely incredible. And they've had quite a bit of success. So I'm very thrilled to go out and meet these young men and women who are quite literally on the other side of the globe, and yet, took an idea and ran with it.
Is this a middle class thing, or does it also include people in lower classes who have less resources?
I think it's this issue goes beyond any class or any political line or even any religious line, that this is something every single person from every walk of life can understand and support. The idea that our communities give us our strength, therefore we need to support them and we need to invest in them. I actually got a very kind letter from a woman in Wisconsin during the course of the first Bank Transfer Day, who identified herself as a member of the Tea Party, and that she, did indicate that she does have a significantly large income, and yet she was standing behind this initiative because she understood that our communities are the most important thing. And I think for far too long they've been neglected, and they really do need our support again. There were two very wealthy businessmen. One was in the Bay Area of California and the other was in Seattle, who'd been interviewed by national level press about moving their money to credit unions and why they decided to do so. And I think all of this, it just comes to illustrate that we can all get behind this. We all understand that we need strong communities if we hope to survive as a people and as a society. And I think that's definitely applies no matter what part of the world you live in. If you can't count on your family, friends, and neighbors, then who can you count on?
Well, exactly. Has this big shift in resources resulted in more investment in local community? Do we know?
Absolutely. I was, although they're not particularly a small area, I was speaking with the San Francisco Firefighter Credit Union. Their main support, their main body of members are firefighters in San Francisco. And I met with them at the Commonwealth Club of California after I'd given a presentation, and they told me that they'd created 18 jobs to keep up with the influx of members. And I hear all these big numbers thrown around constantly of, 600,000 that had moved in the month of Bank Transfer Day, or 6 million to date. Those numbers are oftentimes very hard to visualize and think of, that many people standing before you. But 18 was a number that I could definitely identify with, and think of 18 fathers or mothers who now not only are able to earn very fair wages and support their families, but they're proud of their work, that they can come home to their families at night and say, I made a difference in my community today. And that is a very powerful thing. So even beyond, the team that they'd hired, when a credit union has an influx of deposits, they're then able to offer more low interest rate and responsible loans to small businesses. And small businesses are definitely the backbone for creating jobs in the American economy. And offering these low interest rate and responsible loans to small businesses, I think enables Americans to do what I say we've always done best, which is roll up our sleeves and get to work.
When you look at this thing nationally, how much of a constraint is what is generally considered to be an American view that private enterprises are best when it comes to any form of certainly includes banking, and that cooperatives, credit unions are somehow a form of socialism? How much does that restrain some Americans and deter them from putting the money into something which is not necessarily a private enterprise, obviously private enterprise bank.
There is a common misconception that credit unions are a form of socialism, and the misconception comes into play there that credit unions actually have a democratic structure, that all members vote on major changes to the credit union and all members benefit from membership in that credit union. And I would say when you look at the American government, for example, you see that same structure there, that we all have a say and we all benefit from living in this country. Socialism is, at least my understanding of it is that it's a forced system, that you're, made to participate in this structure. And certainly no one's making anyone join a credit union. Nobody's twisting any arms here. In fact, I definitely didn't even, like I said, I only sent the invitation to 500 of my 800 friends because I didn't want to bother anyone. I didn't want to send a message that might not be heard. And so I think, that democratic structure is definitely more beneficial to their body of members and the communities they serve.
You went to some pains to distance your initiative from the Occupy Wall Street movement and the physical occupation of premises and some of the activities that went with that. Why the distinction? Why did you want to draw that distinction?
Well, I think that even beyond the actual actions themselves, the structure of the two movements were very different. I definitely don't agree with disruption. And I watched when Occupy LA set up their camp, I watched a couple of things. One, how there was a farmer's market that would serve that local community there. And by occupiers being in that location, they directly prevented the farmer's market from taking up their space. And so that did a couple of things. It prevented farmers who work very hard from providing their products and obtaining money for them. And then it also prevented or made more difficult for those individuals who lived in that community to have access to fresh local produce.
Yeah.
Now my mother ran a trucking company most of my childhood, and I grew up in a farming community. So I know the benefits of fresh local produce, and I think it's very tragic that those children who live in that community were not offered, this produce they'd come to expect. And I think as well, beyond, the structures of the movements themselves, I saw some things within the organizers of Occupy that I didn't agree with, and that is causing disruption within banks. It is illegal to remain on private property after you've been asked to leave. And I think, most of the world saw what happened in the Citibank in LaGuardia in New York when Occupy was asked to leave and they refused. The bank told them one last time, we will have to lock the doors because we've called the police. The police are saying lock the doors. If you do not leave, you will be locked inside. And they refused to do so. And that, I think, was fairly manipulative on the part of the organizers to set this up in a way that it would, make the bank employees out to be the bad guys, when really the only complaint that the bank employees had that day was that these organizers were filming video inside the bank. And filming video inside a banking institution is illegal, and rightfully so. So, all of this disruption was just so unnecessary that I saw that there was a more peaceful and positive way of doing things, and that's the approach I chose to take.
Is social media likely to replace that kind of physical demo in future and affect bank policies in a much more you hit them where it hurts, as distinct from chucking a brick through the window?
I think that, each situation is different. And when you're trying to mobilize the masses to take independent action, social media is definitely a very valuable tool. Now, that's not to say that social media would replace, civil rights movements. And that's the main comparison I heard drawn by Occupy organizers was, Martin Luther King organized sit-ins and he organized marches. And, I thought about that and I thought, I'm sure had social media been around then, I'm sure he and his staff would have used it much more significantly, and it would have been an absolute blessing to them. But in this case of, doing a sit-in or occupying an area, I don't think it's as effective because you're not being told you can't be in this area, that, occupying a park, that's a public park. And nobody had been told because of the color of their skin or their sexual orientation or their religion that they couldn't be in that park. And that's why I think it's very ineffective versus, if someone had told me, say I couldn't take advantage of a bank services because I'm a woman, I definitely would have organized a sit-in. That I agree on that stance. If you're kept out of a location because of, the way you're born, I definitely believe that a sit-in might be more effective. But for independent consumer actions, I think social media is incredible at opening a conversation. And then, of course, you need someone, I guess, at the helm to direct the conversation towards solutions and away from problems.
So what happens next? Are you going to have a bank transfer day again? How will you sustain this, particularly if the banks return to their old ways?
Well, I don't think much has changed in the banks. At this point, though, as I mentioned earlier, people evolve. We evolve every single day. And I don't think that America is facing the same obstacles that we were a year ago. So, just holding another bank transfer day deadline goal every November 5th, I think would be rather like a dog chasing its tail. And it wouldn't be moving forward. And that's my ultimate goal with anything I do, is to constantly move forward. So moving forward, I've been working with different movements in other countries and providing information, insight, or advice to them. I've been working on creating awareness of legislation. There's a bill sitting on the American Senate calendar that's been sitting there for about 6 months that really we were promised a vote 6 months ago, and we haven't received a vote. This piece of legislation would allow credit unions to continue offering loans to small businesses. As is, if this does not get passed, they will have to stop. They will hit an arbitrary cap and will not be allowed to continue helping communities grow. So I've been raising awareness about that piece of legislation. And while many Americans are paying attention to the presidential race, I'm urging them to pay attention to the Senate and House races as well. That, we have many senators up for re-election who are not supporting this important piece of legislation. And my personal belief is that they are, refuting it or ignoring it because they've received campaign contributions from major banks. And, my saying there to supporters is, they can have billions upon billions of dollars in campaign contributions, but without our votes, they won't be elected. So, that's part of the evolution, has been pushing that. And then, at the same time, on top of all that, I'm still there every day responding to questions and concerns from American consumers who are looking for a credit union or have questions about investments. And, as well directing, I get a steady stream of emails from supporters in other countries.
And that was Kristen. Why do people have such difficult names? The founder of Bank Transfer Day, which we marked around the world on November the 5th.